I should have said that by way of information, this last family that we helped out with an adoption, the baby was born 8 weeks early and 3 pounds 10 ounces, and so last I heard, she's doing better, improving. But Naomi Ruth is her name, and so I know they would appreciate your prayers. Last name is Floyd, so pray for her as well. All right, so tonight we're on the second lesson of this, talking about the tumultuous times that happened during the Kings, First and Second Kings. So we're going to be in First Kings chapter 1 to start out with. Randy, did you guys get a book? A book? Randy? No. Anybody else need one? There's a couple more left. Here we go, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Whoop. You know, hand that one back to Zach. There we go. Okay. All right. So in chapter 1, you can see we on the first page there of your, I think it's first page. Oh, sorry, Nick, you need one? Okay. Yeah, your next one costs $12.50. So no. So all right. So as we go through this, and the first page, I think it's first page in your book that gives you the reading of what to do each week. If you do that before class, hopefully you'll prepare, because we're no possible way we can, or even going to try to read and cover 11 chapters in a verse-by-verse fashion. But if you've read over this and seen, you give it some thought before you come into class, that will be greatly helpful in our discussion, because as I mentioned, this is designed to be participatory. Hopefully get some input from you all on the questions that are in your book. So in the first opening here in chapter 1, the first 27 verses, David, we just closed last week with the United Kingdom. We had Saul, David, and Solomon, who each reigned for 40 years. And we're really going to start out with Solomon's reign tonight, but we're still in the United Kingdom, as it is often referred to. And these are the last days of David's life. He's getting old, we're told, and his fourth son, Adonijah, knowing that his dad is old and ready to pass on, he presumes himself to be the king. If you look here in the first few verses of chapter 1, First Kings, now King David was old, advanced in age, and they covered him with garments, but he could not be kept warm. So they bring in Abishag is her name, a beautiful woman to take care of him, to nurse and provide for him, as well as to lay with him. It says not intimately, but to lay with him to help bring about bodily warmth. But if you look at verse 5, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. So he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen with 50 men to run before him, and his father to run before him. As his father had never. Okay, look. All right, so we're in chapter 1 of First Kings. Okay, and at verse 5, let's all start there together. Now, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. So he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen with 50 men to run before him. And his father had never rebuked him at any time by asking, why have you done so? And he was also a very handsome man, and he was born after Absalom. Now, he had conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar the priest, and they allied themselves with Adonijah. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Rai, and mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adonijah. So Adonijah sacrificed sheep and oxen, fattened steers by the stone of Zoheleth, which is beside En-Rogel, and he invited all of his brothers, the king's sons, and all of the men of Judah, the king's servants. But, verse 10, he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the mighty men, or his brother Solomon. So that begs the question, why wouldn't he invite them? Okay. Okay, yeah, He's wise enough to know, as it said in the earlier verses, they allied themselves with David. So Adonijah knows he's acting contrary to what David wants and what David's going to do. He's presuming himself to be the king. And then verses 11 to 27, I won't try to read through all of this, but Nathan and Bathsheba devise a plan, or actually Nathan devises the plan. He and Bathsheba work together to arrest this situation with Adonijah and put Solomon on the throne, who actually is the one that David wants to be on the throne, who has already been said would be on the throne. And so this situation plays out. Now, why would Nathan and Bathsheba be so concerned about Solomon being the man? I mean, is it just godliness and they're desirous of serving the Lord? I mean, it could be, but who is Solomon? I mean, in regard to, Bathsheba's son. I mean, so we've got a special kinship here that she would feel, as opposed to one of David's other wives that Adonijah comes from. So in the first question I have in your book, read 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 7 to 12, how is this a response? What's going on with Adonijah? How is that a response to what God had said would happen because of Bathsheba and Uriah, the sin that David did? What did God promise?
He said he would raise up adversity from your own house.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to have trouble, David, all the days of your kingship, and it's going to be troubles even from within your own house. So we could already put Absalom in there, who's already done his deeds. Now we have Adonijah, another one of David's children, and he is going to do this. He tries to usurp the throne, or tries to take this role from him. God said the sword would never depart. You'll have problems within your own house. And Adonijah does much like Absalom had done. So let's think about this more from a practical application for us today. So how does sin's consequences continue to pop up in our lives today? I mean, what other example can you think of? Exactly. That was the first one that came to my mind. Appreciate you bringing it up.
These are consequences like decades later, right?
Right.
These consequences are decades after the sin.
Right.
Sin doesn't always have like this immediate consequence 20 years ago. It had a consequence tomorrow.
Right. So that's my question. So give me an illustration of what that might be today in our world. Yes. Okay. Right. Do their voices always go higher like that? I'm just curious. Okay. Yes. Right. I understand. Sorry. It happens. It comes out of me. I try to hold it back sometimes, and I just don't win. But you're right. But so what else can you think of?
Drug use and addiction.
Sure, drug use and addiction. Somebody, and they're going to struggle with that and fight against that over and over and over and over, maybe for the rest of their life, depending on the severity of it. Okay, yeah. And so you have, somebody steals and they get arrested and they get put in jail or prison because of what they've done. And now, maybe they've served their time, but what? It's on their record the rest of their life, okay? So they go to apply for this job and they say, sorry, you can't do that if you have a record, okay? You try to do something. So, sin has its consequences, and it pops up sometimes just the same way as it does for David. Not necessarily trouble within your own house or the sword never depart, but sin has that way of coming back. Mark?
Well, David's sin with Sheba had its immediate consequences, but like you're saying, these other things are direct. God said they are a consequence of what you did.
Right.
And somebody can commit fornication or adultery in their 20s, and or as a teenager that directly impacts their life 30, 40, 50 years later. They could have a great marriage, or they could be repentant, they could be
Right.
forgiven, and yet they can still have consequences of those sins.
Sure. Yeah.
You know,
And
it
that's
could
what's
very well financial or otherwise. Something can happen,
exactly. And that, I mean, that's my point.
and it does.
That one of the things that when we read Old Testament, I mean, I've had people tell me before, well, I don't like studying the Old Testament. That's already over and done with, and so on. But there's so much that we learn from the history of how God deals with His people. So much we learn about God. So much we learn about where we are today and why we are today, and so on and so forth. But I mean, here's a great example of sin and what it does. To think that I'm going to get away with it, I mean, then I'm just fooling myself. If I think I can sin, get away with it, not have consequences. There will be consequences. Whether I get caught or not is not necessarily even under consideration. So this happens, and no matter how hard you try to avoid it or how hard you try to hide it, it still has its consequences that come back over and over and over sometimes. All right, then in the last part of this chapter, verses 28 to 53, David is informed, he's told about Adonijah's plot. I think it's kind of interesting how they do this, what Nathan said. Remember what he says? He goes, now you go in and tell David what's happening. Adonijah's trying to take over the throne, and you didn't set this up in your plan. And then as soon as you're done talking, what? I'll come in and I'll tell him the same thing. Oh, no, David, the whole kingdom's falling apart. It's kind of the impression of this. So it's just, here's this, and David's going to have to react. And so, David, didn't you say Solomon was going to be the guy? In fact, Nathan says, did you change your mind and forget to tell me? Is kind of how he lays this picture out for him. And David says, no. I mean, Solomon then, in verses 28 to 40, is appointed as the king. And they have a celebration for this appointment ceremony. And Adonijah, in verses 41 to 53, Adonijah and his group hear this. And their question is, what? No, their question is, what's going on? What's the noise? Yeah, what's happening that we don't know? I mean, what is this? What's happening? And so then they hear what it is. Oh, Solomon, by the way, has been appointed. David appointed him, and now he's he's sitting on the throne in David's place. And so now Adonijah's at what is he going to do with himself? Type of situation. And he runs, and he's going to do what? Runs into the temple area, as it would, or what we would think of. Grabs the horns of the altar, meaning what? I mean, why would you do that? That's right. You're not going to kill me here. I'm clinging to God and to the presence of God, or what I think of as the closest to the presence of God. You won't do that. You're not going to do that. And so in chapter 2, King David dies. But I want to ask that question before this. Since Solomon was not the oldest son of David, why was he chosen above the others? Because usually it passes on to the oldest child. And if that oldest child has passed, been killed in battle, whatever, then the next oldest son. But so why Solomon? Because Adonijah's older. Okay, so there's a promise that he's made. But what else? I mean, what else can you think of maybe that would be a reason for this? Okay, yeah. And he also, I mean, I think we can't take God out of the equation, that God knows who the right one is, and God makes selections, and he doesn't always select the oldest one. Can you think of an example? Jacob and Esau. I mean, there's other examples. So, yeah, we could talk about, it doesn't have to be the oldest one. God didn't just gyp Adonijah or somebody out of this. God gets to choose who he wants to choose. And
24, he says that the Lord established him.
right.
Not David.
That's exactly right. So look at another passage. Hold your place here. I want you to go to First Chronicles. That's where the pages are really stuck together in your Bible. First Chronicles chapter 22. I should be hearing as they peel apart. Yeah. Leave it, you cuss. That's what that one guy said. 1 Chronicles chapter 22. Look at verse 6. Then he called for his son Solomon. This is David, obviously, and commanded him to build a house for the Lord God of Israel. David said to Solomon, my son, I have intended to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, but the word of the Lord came to me, saying, you have shed much blood and have waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you have shed so much blood on the earth before me. Behold, a son will be born to you, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side, for his name will be Solomon, and I will give him peace and quiet to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. God made this selection. It's not just that Bathsheba and Nathan concocted a plan, and David in his daughterage didn't know what was happening, so he got snookered and Adonijah lost. I mean, this was God's plan all along. So in chapter 2, Solomon takes the position now. He is the king. And in verses 1 through 9, David instructs Solomon to remove his rivals and to bless those who help him. That's the idea behind it. So Adonijah is executed. Abiathar, the priest, is dismissed. Joab is executed. And Shimei is basically confined. I mean, he's basically under house arrest. He has to stay within this one area. So all of this happens in verses 10 to 27 of chapter 2 in 1 Kings. But then this unique or interesting situation comes up. Adonijah, who was spared when he went and grabbed onto the horns of the altar, Solomon said, okay, I won't kill you as long as you remember what he said? Yeah, basically, as long as you're a worthy individual, no harm will come to you. But if you're not, then you can understand or expect that you're going to die, is basically what he promises to him. So Adonijah makes a request, and he asks Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and says, I have one request. That's all I have, one request. Please don't deny me. And she says, okay, what is your request? Go tell Solomon that I want Abishag to be my wife. And she says, okay, I'll go do it. Okay, kind of no harm, no foul is almost seems like what Bathsheba thinks. So she goes to Solomon and says, hey, got a request for you. I mean, it's a beautiful picture of how he honors his mother when she comes in and has a throne set up for her next to him. I mean, it's a beautiful picture of this love and respect that he has for his mother. So Adonijah's request, I mean, seems rather innocuous to have this woman to be his wife. Solomon's initial response is, he says, why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he is my older brother. And it makes you kind of scratch your head and say, that's in chapter 2 and verse 22. So why is Adonijah so irritated, so frustrated? I mean, Solomon's got plenty of women, okay? He's got a harem of women. So why would this one, what can you think of that might make this different? Why would that be something of any consequence?
As though she was the wife of David. This would make a son marrying her, slave with his father. That would make him the king.
Okay, so
That would make him the king. He's got the wisdom.
It's going to raise my stock in that regard.
In the eyes of the whole nation.
Yeah. So, I mean, Adonijah's request seems innocuous when you just say one woman out of many, but Solomon rightly saw through Adonijah's desire to marry her as part of his brother's ongoing attempt, it seems, to take over the kingdom. In fact, he said, why don't you just ask for the whole kingdom if that's what you're going to do? So I don't know if Bathsheba just didn't understand it, but it was normally always the case, let me put it that way, that when one king defeats another king, that he takes his harem. This now becomes part of my harem. So David and Abishag were together. So even though it says it wasn't an intimate relationship, but it will be viewed this way. So now I have her as my wife or in my harem, so I must be the guy. I'm in better standing than Solomon is. And by the way, I'm older than Solomon. Okay, back to that same argument that he's making before. So that was often or most often the case, that one would take the harem and make them part of his own and go in that way. So anyway, that I think is kind of an interesting picture. So Joab is executed, verses 28 to 35, verses 36 to 46. Shimei, we told it already had to be confined, but Shimei gets the news that what happened? Yeah, a couple of your servants ran away. Okay, your slaves ran away. So Shimei, basically gets on his horse and runs after him. I mean, he's going to go try to track them down. And he does, and he brings them back. But the word gets out and it's told to Solomon, by the way, Shimei left the city, and you told him he can't leave the city. So Solomon does what? Well, first of all, he calls him in and says, hey, didn't I tell you not to leave? You agreed not to leave. I told you not to leave. Told you what was going to happen if you left. And it appears that he has nothing to say. And so he is killed as a result of disobeying as well. So this next question. So Solomon is generally known, most often referred to, or known for his wisdom. So how did he get that? How did he get so wise? What'd you say? Yeah, he asked for it. God was, it seems in the early stages of Solomon's reign, God's really impressed. Go back to what Mike said. He had the qualities of a leader. God selected him. He's impressed with Solomon, and he says, okay, ask whatever you want. He's given carte blanche. You ask for whatever you want, and I'll give it to you. And Solomon says, according to the New American Standard, he says, I'm like a little boy. Okay, I've got this vast kingdom, and I'm like a little boy. I don't know what to do, where to go in, and how to come out. I don't know. I mean, I need wisdom. And so God says, what? Okay, I'll give you wisdom, and since you didn't ask for wealth and honor, I'm going to give you wealth and honor too. So the next question should be an easy one, okay? So what would you choose if you were given carte blanche from God? I mean, it's amazing how wisdom works when you think about it. I mean, we think of the genie and the 3 wishes or something along those lines. You grant you 3 wishes. God says, in essence, whatever you want, I'll give to you. And Solomon says, I need wisdom. I mean, I can empathize with that, can't you? To think, I mean, you're this new king and this nation that's vast and it's God's people. I need some help. I need some direction. I wish our politicians today were praying for wisdom and having granted to them wisdom. I'm not saying, I don't know, maybe they are, but praying for it. But this beautiful picture here in 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon's going to ask for wisdom, verses 5 through 15. He's asked what he wants. He asks for wisdom. God grants it and blesses him with wealth and honor. But I want you to look at the first part of chapter 3, because I think there's something intriguing here. Solomon formed a marriage alliance, verse 1, with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were still sacrificing on the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. So, first of all, we're given this kind of just interesting little interlude. Solomon marries an Egyptian princess. Okay, so we're never told that was wrong, that he did that, although the law told him not to intermarry with Canaanites, the people of Canaan. when they went in and dispossessed the people. So here is Solomon. He marries this Egyptian princess. Why might he do that? Yeah, I mean, that was done all the time. I mean, you want to look at Queen Victoria in history and see how many countries she has descendants who are reigning and ruling. And it's amazing how many in her family alone. Alliances are made. I'll give my daughter to your son. We'll have an agreement. There's this now happy pact now between us, and so on. And that was done quite often. So he does this. But the intriguing thing, look at verse 3 and 4. Now Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except, now I'm reading the New American Standard, except that he was sacrificing and burning incense on the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there because there was a great high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night and asked him, "What do you want me to give you?" So so Solomon is pictured as this man who loves God and wants to follow God and is following God, but it says he sacrificed on these high places. Now, it's not condemned here. There's nothing said about it that it's condemned. In fact, some translations don't even write it as an except, making it sound different from this. So what's going on? Okay, could be. Could be that that he loved. Okay, that's certainly going to come up later. But at this point it says he loved the Lord, but he offered sacrifices on high places. Now, there's another way we could look at it is he was offering sacrifices to God on these high places or at this high place because, what's it say? They didn't have a place yet as far as that goes. So that very well could be what Solomon's doing. And he's offering these sacrifices to God. That's why it's not condemned or anything said, but he did wrong in offering. Later, it does tell us he does wrong when he does this very thing. So I just bring that up for you to I thought it was intriguing the way that is. Yeah, just the verse before. Yeah. He did say not to take them from among the Canaanites. So, and this was an Egyptian wife. That's what I'm saying. This was not a direct violation of the law, God's Mosaic law at this point.
Solomon's like wisdom and savvy doesn't especially coming right after the marriage to Pharaoh's daughter, feels like a politically savvy thing for him as well, right? Probably doing something in a place where a lot of people respect, where a lot of people worship whatever deity it is as well.
Well, and however the book of First Kings, whoever the author was of First Kings in the compilation of this, also is just information that's put together. So we don't know if it directly followed one after another. The editor, if you will, would have possibly thought that very thing and put it in this fashion. But then Solomon's going to display his wisdom in a very unique way with these two women and this child. But wisdom is like that. Wisdom makes perfect sense when you look at it. But to think of it on the spot, that's what takes wisdom, okay? I mean, Solomon says, okay, we'll cut the baby in half. And you say, wow, what a great, okay, yeah, that makes all kind of sense. We can see how wise it is. But to say, it's my child, no, it's my child, how are you going to settle this thing? Solomon just says, well, we'll cut the baby in half. And the mother of the child who's already died says, I'll be fine. Half's better than nothing. And so the mother of the living child says, no, don't harm the child. She can have the child, basically. And Solomon says, okay, yeah, that's the real mom. I mean, that's wisdom displayed. He shows it over and over again, but I think it's kind of interesting. In chapter 4, verses 29 to 34, there's an accounting of Solomon's wisdom. And it appears during this time of Solomon's life, it's very close to the time that he wrote Psalm 72. That's the only psalm that we know of that he wrote, Psalm 72. And he wrote, I would suspect, many of the Proverbs during this period of his life. He's been granted wisdom by God. He has this great great blessing that's come to him. All right, so Solomon then builds the temple and he builds his palace. I just have those two chapters. I want to look at one great thing in chapter 6. So much, like I said, hopefully you've read this ahead of time. I want you to look in chapter 6, 1 Kings 6, verse 11. Let's see, am I right? Yeah, 1 Kings 6:11. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, as for this house which you are building, meaning the temple, if you will walk in my statutes and execute my ordinances and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will fulfill my word with you, which I spoke to David your father, and I will dwell among the sons of Israel, and I will not abandon my people Israel. What an amazing promise that God gives to Solomon. If you'll do what I tell you to do, I'll be with you, and I will be with Israel. I mean, it's basically and you'll live happily ever after. It's almost what we could add in there. God says, I'll be with you, I'll bless you, and be with Israel and bless Israel. It's just a beautiful, amazing promise that he makes. Now, if we were to fast forward and think of our lives today, isn't it the same promise that God makes to us? That if you'll follow me, if you'll do as I tell you to do, I'll be with you forever. Doesn't mean you won't have troubles or trials, just like Solomon's going to have challenges and struggles. But I'll be with you and I'll provide for you and protect you. And we have heaven to look forward to. And that's God's promise to us. And I think it's the same thing. It's just a beautiful fulfillment of all of that. Okay, so in chapter 8, just jumping ahead here. The temple has been completed, as well as Solomon's house or palace has been completed. If you read through the size of the temple, you might be shocked, really, at how small the building itself actually is. I mean, we're looking at a couple of trailers, basically, that are sitting there. What's a 42 foot that you pull? 53 feet, so not even two trailers, okay, as far as that goes, because we're talking about 90 feet. And so it's just, this isn't some vast, huge temple as we tend to think. It's a very relatively small building. So they have it built, and then in chapter 8, God's presence is going to fill the temple as he comes and sees this place that Solomon has built for him. And I just asked this question, for what you read about the temple being completed and the dedication and so on, what would you say the mood is at this event? Yeah, I mean, it's festive, celebratory. I mean, not to mention, it is a horribly bloody, ugly scene when you look at all of the animals that are killed. I mean, we're not talking that they're in some refrigerated back room, some place that somebody has a butcher shop. I mean, this is outside. And what happens when you have that? You've got flies, you've got gnats, this is just not this beautiful, pristine kind of event that we sometimes think. It had to be literally rivers of blood of animals as they're killing these animals and sacrificing or giving them to the Lord. But it was festive. They were celebrating. Yes, finally we have the place that God said he would dwell with us and be with us. So look in chapter, we're going to look in chapter 9 and look at the first few verses in chapter 9, because God's going to appear to Solomon a second time. It came about that when Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all that Solomon desired to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he had appeared to him in Gibeon. And the Lord said unto him, I have heard your prayer and your plea, which you have offered before me, and I have consecrated this house which you have built by putting my name there forever, and my eyes and my heart will be there always. As for you, if you will walk before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and honesty, acting in accordance with everything that I have commanded you. And if you keep my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, just as I promised to your father David, saying to you, you shall not be deprived of one man upon the throne. Here is this grand promise again, this beautiful promise. If you'll follow me, I'll be with you, and I'll establish your throne, and it'll be forever and ever, just like I promised David. And of course, Solomon is sitting on David's throne, which is a fulfillment of that promise. So here is this beautiful thing. But there's a very important point that's made that we need to understand about Old Testament history. It goes on to say, but, verse 6, if you or your sons indeed turn away from following me and do not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have placed before you, but you go and you serve other gods and you worship them, then I will cut Israel off from the land which I have given them and the house which I have consecrated for my name. I will expel them from my sight. So Israel will become a saying and an object of derision among all peoples, and this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone who passes by will be appalled and hiss and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and this house? And they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and they adopted other gods and worshipped and served them. For that reason, the Lord has brought all this adversity on them. So when somebody claims today that Israel should still have possession of the land where they live, there's no validity to that, okay? Just like when God kicked them off the land, he didn't violate any principle that he had ever said. The Bible does say that it will be your land as a perpetual covenant. But if you turn against me, this is what will happen. Now, we're able to see in this verse, because we know history that comes later, that Israel is ejected off of the land and the temple itself was ransacked and destroyed. Exactly what God said would happen. Why did it happen? Because they didn't do what God said. He said, if you turn and you follow other gods, this is what's going to happen. And if you read through the prophets, what was the number one thing they were dealing with? Baal and Ashtoreth, the false gods of the lands and of the peoples that had been absorbed into Jerusalem and into Israel. And so as a result of rejecting God, God said, hey, I didn't leave you, you left me, in essence. And so it's an important point to understand. Premillennialists who claim that Israel should still have the land, they're just wrong. Okay? God said what would happen if they turned away from him. So it appears during this time in Solomon's life that he wrote the book Song of Solomon, it would appear, if he's the author, which I think he is, that Solomon wrote the book Song of Solomon, which is really a love story in and of itself. But then in chapter 11, where we'll get to just quickly here at the end, that Solomon turns his heart from God. Verses 1 through 8, Solomon marries foreign women, and they entice him to turn to idolatry. Now, as I said earlier, back when we read about him marrying this Egyptian princess, it doesn't say anything that he did was wrong. But now he's marrying these foreign women of the Canaanite people or the Canaan dwellers who were there. Solomon marries them. They entice him to idolatry. And God tells Solomon in verses 9 through 13, look here, chapter 11, dropping down to verse 9, where he says, now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him regarding this thing, that he was not to follow other gods, but he did not comply with what the Lord had commanded. So the Lord said to Solomon, it's okay, don't worry about it. No, he didn't say that. He said, since you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I commanded you, I will certainly tear the kingdom away from you, and will give it to your servant. However, now here's the grace and the goodness and mercy of God. However, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it away from the hand of your son. Yet I'll not tear away all of the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. I mean, this shows to me that God never delights in punishing anybody. I mean, God had plainly declared to Solomon, if you do this, I'll bless you and take care of you and provide for Israel. But if you don't, if you turn your back and you walk away and you go after other gods, this is what will happen to you. And so when he does it, and when God, who's always true to his word, fulfills what he says he's going to do, it's like he's torn up inside. And he said, but I'm not going to do it in your lifetime because of my love for David. And David was a man who tried to follow me. He was a man after my own heart. And I'm not going to give the whole kingdom away. You can keep a part of it. There's going to be a portion that you keep and that stays. I think that's the picture of God. He's going to be true to his word. I don't think God wants to send anybody to hell. But God's going to send people to hell, or they're going to send themselves to hell, if you want to be more specific. And God says, here's what I want. Here's what I'm offering you. Here's what I'm giving you. Heaven, if you want it. If you'll follow me and do the same kind of principles that are stated here. So with all this amazing success that Solomon has had, I mean, the kingdom expands. He's wealthy. The kingdom is at peace. They're not having all the wars they had during David's reign and David's period of 40 years. Solomon has all of this going for this amazing success. How could he mess it up? Okay.
Women. God said so.
Okay, yeah, exactly. And sexual satisfaction or gratification is such a big thing. I think that's why it tops almost every catalog of sins that you read about in the Bible. The very first one is usually adultery or fornication. God's talking about sexual sin. Why? Because it's such a strong pull that leads people away. And so here is Solomon. He is amazingly successful, amazingly powerful. He's got 700 wives and 300 concubines, okay? A harem of 1,000 women. And what do you expect is going to happen with that? He's going to have his heart turned away from these foreign women. They're not saying, hey, we really need to do what God says. Because one of the things, if you'll remember, back in the law, when God said, if the day they have a king, he's not to amass a large harem of women to himself, basically. That's the very thing Solomon does. So what can be done? What should we do to prevent that in our lives so that we don't fail in the same way he did? Okay, all right. Huh?
Find one and keep her.
Okay, but I mean, we sometimes make light of it, but it is being vigilant to build the kind of marriage that we should have at home if we're married, okay? Okay. Right. That's right.
So you have to know yourself. You have to know yourself in that position.
Okay, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I've used the example before. My dad drank. I mean, he's an alcoholic. Alcohol's never appealed to me, but there are things that do, and that may not be my trigger, but it's somebody else's trigger. And so how they deal with that, it's knowing what are your triggers, being able to address them. If I can eliminate them, great. If I can't eliminate them, I need to control them so that I'm able to know and do for myself. But it's having some kind of a battle plan to prevent this from going down the wrong way. So at this low point, and we'll leave it right here, at this low point in Solomon's life, I think this is when he writes the book of Ecclesiastes, which is probably the most negative book in all of the Bible. And so I know you'd say Job, but I know, but Ecclesiastes is this picture of life without God. And so it seems to me that that's what, at the time in Solomon's life, that he wrote that. So, all right, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here tonight.